Welcome to Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. I'm here with my producer, Tom Garbett. On today's show is Jena Peterson. Welcome, Jena.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
My wife and I have known Jena for a couple of years. She is gay. She is active LDS. She is married to a man, and they have 3 wonderful children. For any of my listeners that are new to LGBTQ, Jena is in what's called a mixed orientation marriage, where one person is straight and one person is gay. Jena owns her own practice as a life coach focusing on LGBTQ individuals and or their families. Jena's contact information is listed at listenlearnandlove.org under the speaker section. Really glad you're here with us, Jena. I've known Jena for a couple of years, as I mentioned, and she is awesome. I've heard her speak a few times, and as I became new ally to LGBTQ, Jena has been one of the many people in my life that has helped me understand LGBTQ people, where they're coming from, what their life mission is, and especially their beauty and their gifts and all their attributes to help and lift others. And I remember a time when Jena spoke, and we'll probably get to this, that was deeply impactful to me and helped me to see the role of the Savior in our life. But let's start with a little bit about yourself. Jena, tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's really great to see you and to be with you tonight. So, as you said, I'm gay and I'm married to my husband, Todd, and I've been out publicly for a little over 3 years now, and that journey has certainly been challenging, but very rewarding also. And yeah, together we have 3 kids, and
what are your kids' ages, Jena?
My oldest is almost 12.
Wow.
And my middle child is, she's 9, and then our youngest is 7.
Uh-huh.
So,
congratulations on having 3 kids. Things
you.
are busy around your home.
Yeah, it is busy, and they're great kids, and it's been fun to see how they've reacted to me coming out, and we frequently have LGBT people at our home, and it's actually a really great thing for our kids to be with them and love them and to interact with them and call them family. So, yeah.
I love calling LGBTQ people family. And you make your home here in Utah, Jena. Tell us where you grew up.
So I grew up in Pleasant Grove, Utah until I was 14, and then we moved down to Gilbert, Arizona. Mm-hmm. And that's where I went to high school and then part of college. Mm-hmm. So,
and how old were you when you got married to Todd?
Well, I was I was old. I was old for a Mormon gal to get married. I was 27, mm-hmm. and Todd was 30. So mm-hmm. we were literally probably the oldest people in our singles ward, and we just said, well, we might as well marry each other before we get kicked out of here. So
I love that story. My wife and I were about the same ages.
Oh, good.
28 and 27, and so we were 2 of the older ones in our singles ward, and we like that foundation we have of just maturity and a lot of experience that brought to our marriage. So
yeah,
we're kindred spirits. Tell us more about your orientation. Were you always aware that you were gay? And maybe even say some women would use the term lesbian and some women would use the term gay. So help our listeners with both of those, just your journey to understand your orientation and just vocabulary so that people that are trying to understand what the correct vocabulary is to use would know what to use.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it just is a preference. Lesbian and gay, they mean the same thing. Some women prefer to use the word lesbian, and I prefer gay. I don't really know why. Maybe it's just because it's easier to say. I don't know.
It's one syllable.
It's just one syllable. But, as far as figuring out my sexual orientation, growing up, I wasn't aware that I was gay, although now that I look back, it makes perfect sense, and I can't believe I didn't know. But, back in the day, there wasn't a lot of dialogue about LGBT people, especially within the church. And I would never even think that I could be gay because I didn't think Mormons were gay. And so it never really even crossed my mind. And so, but I look back now and I see that I had experienced heartbreak with friends, either in high school or in college. I remember having a romantic attachment to a friend of mine in college, but being confused about it and not really understanding what it was. And I just sort of dismissed it. And I went on and I served my mission and came home and carried on with life. And
Where did you serve your mission?
I served in New Zealand.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Are there multiple missions in New Zealand, or is it one mission?
At the time, there were 2, but I think there's 3 now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks for your service. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great time of life. I loved it so much.
Did you feel shame? A lot of the LGBTQ people I meet with feel great shame over their orientation or feelings. They just feel it's different than what they should feel as a child of God. Did you feel that, or did you always feel peace about your orientation, especially as you came to terms with it?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. I did feel shame for the first quite a few years when I first figured out that I was gay. And the way that I figured out was gay is actually a little bit interesting and maybe a little bit different than most people because I was already married. It was a couple of years into my marriage, and this is a really vulnerable part of my story, but I feel like it's important to share because I feel like it's true for the majority of mixed orientation marriages. But I will take full ownership for my own story. But a couple years into my marriage, I developed romantic love and attachment to my best friend. And for the first time in my life, I felt my orientation sort of come to life. And it hit me like a ton of bricks because I wasn't sure what to do with it because I was married to my husband and I had a child and I was pregnant with number 2.
Wow.
And so I was presented with this situation of, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm gay, and my whole life actually makes perfect sense now, but I'm Mormon and married to a guy, so this is a little bit complicated, right?
And there's no lesson in church that's ever prepared you for what you're facing right now.
Nope. There's no lessons. They don't talk about this. It wasn't one of the young women's lessons. So.
And thanks for just sharing that. It takes courage just to talk about that stuff. And I know all the listeners would be listening to you right now and just say, thanks for being vulnerable to share what was going on in your life at this time. And if I understand correctly, you're obviously married in a good marriage with baby number 2, and you feel a real significant attachment to another woman, and that sort of is causing you to sort of hit this issue head on, that I'm gay.
Yeah.
And what does this mean for my marriage? What does this mean for my church? What does this mean for me as a mother? And all these crossroads kind of intersecting at the same time, and trying to resolve all that. So keep telling us, more of how you move forward and how you are walking this road. And maybe when did you involve your husband in your orientation? That might be a good spot to start.
Yeah, that's a great question. I came out to him right away.
Wow.
And, Todd was really great about it, and he always has been. He's always been really aware of gay people and really understanding, and a lot of that is because he had gay friends in college that he was really close with, and he was able to sort of watch them through their process and coming out, and also maneuvering this intersection of sexual orientation and religion. And so he was really, really good about it when I came out to him. And I told him right away about my romantic feelings for my friend. And I told him that I didn't know what to do, and it was causing a lot of internal turmoil, because I was recognizing for the first time in my life that I actually skipped a really significant developmental part of my teen life. As teenagers, you know, and in your early 20s, you experience that feeling of falling in love and developing this romantic love, right? I skipped over that. I didn't experience that. And so now that I'm experiencing it, while I'm married and I'm trying to also navigate my religion and my family and this new identity as being gay, it was really, really overwhelming for, you know, when someone who's LDS figures out that they're gay. And for me, I'll speak for me and my story. When I figured out that I was gay, the truth of being gay is as strong as the truthfulness of the gospel to me personally. But at the time, the two didn't mix, right? And I talk about it in a couple of my other talks about my gay heart and my gospel heart, right? And when you have these two massive truths about yourself that are not congruent, it causes an incredible amount of internal turmoil. I decided to move forward in my life and stay in my marriage and try to honor the truth that I felt as far as the gospel, and try to honor the truth of my gay heart by coming out publicly and being able to speak openly about who I am and be involved with LGBT people so that I could feel at home with them, and somehow balance these two truths and honor both of them, so that one of them didn't need to die.
I'm just so touched, Jena, with what you're sharing and your courage to just share how you feel. And I just think we honor everybody how they feel. I love the way you frame this up, your gay heart and your heart about the church, and how those are two beautiful parts about you. And often they're hard to figure out how to make both work at the same time. And I think for our listeners just to hear your story and just the genuine, love that you have for multiple people in your life and how you're navigating that. But also I think all our listeners sense real grief that this one, which I would call, it sounds like a beautiful relationship you had with, came to an end. And I think it's okay to acknowledge grief. And I think I hope our listeners, would likewise feel the grief I'm feeling, is just the grief of something that was a wonderful part of your life ending. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it helps certainly me understand more the difficult road a gay person is on. I've always, all our straight listeners know that we just have those two hearts are never different. There's an authorized path for straight people in the church to move forward, and there's never been a conflict there. And for a gay person to move forward and navigate that road is really complex. And that's one of the purposes of these podcasts, is to help people know the individual crosses that LGBT people carry so we can better understand how to minister. And also learn from LGBTQ people so we can become better people and better disciples. Talk about Todd. It's interesting to me when you're talking about Todd, and you came out to him. Were you worried he'd leave you? Were you worried he'd not believe you? Were you worried? It sounds like he did a pretty good job. Talk about that.
Yeah, Todd did a great job, and that's where I feel so lucky and so blessed to have him, because he didn't take it personal that I'm gay. It doesn't have anything to do with him, right?
Right.
And he never took it personal that I had this friendship with her, because he understood. And I think this is where a lot of people in the church can be educated on this is, having romantic love is a really beautiful part of life. I think Boyd K. Packer said that it's one of the most beautiful kinds of love that anybody could ever have. And so that's where it puts the gay person in the church in a really difficult bind, because I'm married to Todd, and that romantic love and attachment, it doesn't exist on my end in the marriage. And it's difficult for both of us. It's difficult for me. It's difficult for Todd. But that is the reality of our marriage. And so it just depends on what we can do with that, I guess, predicament, you can call it. What do we do now? It's not just something that's nice to have. It's not it's not something that I lust after. It's not something that's just a little tiny part of me. Sexual orientation is a major part of my soul. And so for the church to say, well, if you're LDS and gay, you just don't get to experience romantic love for the rest of your life. Well, that's a really depressing. That's really, really depressing, and can be really debilitating. And so Todd and I have tried to maneuver this and figure this out in our marriage on how we can help our marriage to stay together while honoring the fact that I'm gay and that he's straight, and meet his needs, but also meet my needs. And it can be really, really tricky to navigate. And it's like I said earlier, I'm willing to talk about this publicly because I feel like it's something that people need to understand about mixed orientation marriages, because I think there can be a lot of pressure on the younger generation where parents say, oh, you're gay? Oh, it's okay. You can still marry someone of the opposite gender. Well, they need to be really careful about going into that situation. They really need to be educated, and that's part of what Todd and I have tried to do, is to educate people on the reality of the challenges of a mixed orientation marriage.
And I want to go back to talk about your marriage then. What keeps your marriage together with Todd?
Yeah, that's a great question. Todd and I have a lot of other ways that we attach. We have a beautiful relationship as far as our emotional attachment. We see things eye to eye spiritually. We have the same views on the church. We have the same views about the gospel. And we have a lot of things in common as far as our hobbies. We do, we go boating together. We play softball. We're very active, and we do all these things with our families or with our kids. So there's a lot of other things about our marriage that are really, really great. And so that certainly helps, and it keeps our marriage together. And we're also in a place where we don't put pressure on ourselves to have to make this marriage work no matter how painful it is. And that's been a really personal process for he and I to go through. And we've been really prayerful about that as far as what Heavenly Father would have for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do the best that we can. But as you have heard me say tonight, and as we've seen, that there's a lot of grief that takes place on my end and on his end. And there might come a day when that grief or that pain is too much and has been too much for an extended period of time. And because as long as I'm choosing to be married to Todd, I understand that brings grief and loss to my life off and on forever, because I'm grieving the loss of being able to live my orientation and love and be loved in that romantic way that I don't get when I'm choosing to be married to Todd. And he experiences grief on his end also, because he grieves not having that attachment with me, and he longs for that attachment as well.
I'm struck with the honesty that's present in your marriage. I know when I was a singles ward bishop, I was preparing people for marriage. Some of these marriages that had this great foundation of honesty and trust and communication were the marriages I kind of had the most hope for. So I love the foundation of your marriage, and that your marriage is able to talk about really complicated things, and that you're kind of walking this very difficult road together. But I love your honesty about the future, that you don't know what the future holds, and you both are making this work but not sure what the future holds and how this all works out. And I love your focus on prayer and Heavenly Father guiding you. You mentioned the gospel, and that you and Todd love the gospel. What are some things that in the gospel, teachings or things that are particularly that you and Todd love?
Yeah, that's a great question. We really focus our testimony and our love based around the two basic doctrines, and that is that God is our Father, and that He knows us, He knows me. He didn't make a mistake on me. He didn't make a mistake on any gay or trans person. And we really love what I think is the very, very most important doctrine of the gospel, and that is of the atonement of Jesus Christ. And I have come to know my Savior and my Father in heaven more in the last probably 5 years of my life than I ever have. Because I've had to, and we that's what we base our testimony on, and those are the most important things to us, and to our children.
I love that. I love your belief that as I became an ally, that became clear to me is that God's LGBTQ children are not broken. They're not a mistake. I love born perfect. Everybody's born the way God wants us to be born. And sexual orientation is something that is to be celebrated. And with sexual orientation comes all these wonderful gifts that you hold, Jena. And that makes your unique life mission possible. So that's something that I certainly believe also. And then no one feels broken, no one needs to be fixed. And it doesn't take agency off the table. Everybody still has choices they need to make. But it does help everybody, I think, to feel whole on how they're created. I'm sure that since you're in a mixed orientation marriage, that people would like, what advice would you have? I'm going to ask a few questions here. Let's say someone is listening to this podcast that's in a closeted mixed orientation marriage, so to speak, where one person is gay but not out to the other partner who's straight, and that's been closeted part of their marriage for a long time. What would you say to that person who's wondering, should I come out to my partner?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to that, I would say I feel like it is important to come out to your spouse, because it's too difficult to hold that truth within inside of yourself. And if you can come out and be more authentic and real to who you are, you're going to be able to create a more wholehearted you, with hopes that your spouse will understand. And, if they don't understand at first, there's a lot of resources out there that can help, the situation and help your marriage.
One of the things that I like your advice, and one of the things I like about your own story, Jena, is that Todd didn't see this about him. Mm-hmm. He didn't sort of make it about him and say, he just accepted the facts of the situation and said, what can we do to move forward together?
Right.
That's from what I sense. And I would guess then hopefully for other mixed orientation marriages, if one person comes out that they just look, okay, how can we move forward? What does this mean? Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean our marriage is, changed. We're still the same people, and now we can walk with these truths, mm-hmm. so to speak, together. Talk about there's a lot of examples about mixed orientation marriages in the church. And you touched on this earlier about people that are wondering if they should go into a mixed orientation marriage. Would you recommend what you're doing for others, or how would you give advice to people that are potentially considering your path, or even local leaders that are advising members to follow your path?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Like I said before, mixed orientation marriages they're very challenging, and I can say that from my own personal experience, but from my profession. I meet with a lot of people in mixed orientation marriages with my life coaching practice, and I obviously have a lot of friends in the community who are in mixed orientation marriages, and it's a really, really challenging path. I'm not saying that they're impossible, because there's a lot of mixed orientation marriages that make it, and they're fine.
Did you ever pray to God to be made straight, or make deals with God to be straight?
That's a great question. I've never tried to make deals with God or pray to be straight. I think because I was older when I figured out I was gay, I sort of maybe skipped over that stage. But there have been a few times where I wished I was straight, because it would make life a lot easier, not only in the church, but in our heteronormative society that we live in.
Define heteronormative society. That's a great term. Just let our listeners know more about what that means.
Yeah. It's funny, because I don't think heterosexual people really think about it, because our society is created for heterosexuals with everything. And that's the way that the church is made also. And so it creates vulnerability for a gay person to, first of all, come out. And that's why I felt like I needed to come out, because I just wanted to be seen for who I was. If it wasn't a heteronormative society, I wouldn't have had to come out. Mm-hmm. Right? But I feel like it can be really tricky to be gay in a heteronormative society and church, because it creates that vulnerability.
I talk to lots of LGBTQ people, and they often will pray a lot, especially as younger people in their teens and early 20s, to fit into, they don't want to be different. No one wants to choose to be different. Mm-hmm. And I've never known anybody whose orientation has been made to change through prayer. Have you thought about that? Why would God not change anyone's orientation if they fast and pray?
I think that's a really great point, that probably isn't talked about enough. But I don't think God has the ability to change our soul in who we are as far as our sexual orientation. Because if he did, he would. But I think that there's a reason why there are gay people in the world. And I think that that reason is very beautiful. And I think that we are going to see, I think that's going to come to pass more and more as time goes on, not just in our society, but in the church. And I don't think God, for this is, I guess this is a good way to describe it. If a gay person is praying to God to change, that it could be a really painful thing, because what they're essentially asking God to do is completely change the soul of who they are, right? Because sexual orientation, it actually has very little to do with sex. Sexual orientation is the way that an individual can love and connect with other human beings, which could turn into romantic, sexual type of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where a lot of the misunderstandings are, especially within Mormonism, that they've sexualized it so much. And so when someone comes out as gay, everybody panics and doesn't quite know what to do. And oh my gosh, we've got a gay person. What do we do here? You know,
That's really funny, Jena. I love your sense of humor
it's
on this
kind of
serious
funny
subject, but that's certainly consistent with some of my thoughts. Is that for some reason God doesn't choose to change someone's soul? I love the way you've linked sexual orientation with your soul and your very essence. And so why would God change someone's soul? We're all created the way we're supposed to be, and our unique life missions are made possible because our soul. And so to have that feeling that needs to be changed or that's broken, that is certainly something I felt strongly about, that everybody's soul, I love your term soul, or essence, is something that we all need to embrace and celebrate. And as I've become an ally, I've realized that some of my role was to help lift LGBTQ people. But then to your point, I've realized that LGBTQ people are lifting me and teaching me things that straight people can't, about how to love and accept and support and understand others that are different than me. And I believe our church can't become the church it needs to be until we find a way for LGBTQ people members to feel, the same healing and support that our straight members do. Now, I'm not an advocate asking the church what to change potentially to get there, just that I think we need to get to the point where our straight people and our LGBTQ people have the same level of healing as they're part of Mormonism and feel just as whole. And so I'll let the brethren that I support and sustain figure that out, but I think it's okay as members to acknowledge that more work needs to be done. And I think that's where you're so helpful, Jena. And I'm going to use Elder Ballard's quote that I've used in some of these other podcasts. Elder Ballard November Devotional said, Mormon leaders, along with rank and file, need to listen to and understand what LGBT members are feeling and experiencing. We must do better than we have in the past until all feel they have a spiritual home, a place to worship and serve the Lord. So you, Jena, sharing your story is fulfilling Elder Ballard's charge to listen to stories so we can do better. And that's one of the purposes of these podcasts. So thank you for sharing some of your story. I want to go back a little bit to mixed orientation marriages. Do you get calls to sometimes publicly talk about your mixed orientation marriage for people that kind of want to take your example and make it the norm for everybody?
I do. I've had a few people reach out to me in the past, I think hoping that I would talk their child into entering into a mixed orientation marriage, which I don't do. And I think it's been a little bit of a disappointment to some people, but I honor an individual's agency and what they choose. And And I would never force anybody into a mixed orientation marriage or tell them that that's what's best for them.
Why? Tell us more why you don't feel a need to sort of move people in the direction you've walked. I think we kind of know the answer, but just help us understand that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I know that I sit in an interesting spot, right? Because I'm choosing to be in my marriage right now, but Todd and I, our message is, yes, we are in this marriage and it works for us right now, and it's good. We have a good marriage, but we also caution others about the challenges that come, because I think there's too many divorces happening because people enter into these marriages really naive and not understanding the complexities of the marriage. Mm-hmm. And so our message is, I don't regret getting married to Todd at all. And he doesn't regret marrying me, because we're always doing the very best we can according to the truth that we know and that we knew when we got married, right? Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's working right now. But for others who are thinking about entering into a mixed orientation marriage, I would make sure, like I said, that they are very educated and really have an understanding of what they're getting into, that your orientation it's not going to change. Temple attendance, prayer, fasting, relying on the power of the atonement. The atonement's not going to change your sexual orientation, just like it's not going to change a straight person. It's the exact same thing.
Talk about, I don't know how much of your ward knows that you're gay.
They all do.
They all do. I kind of thought that would be your answer, Jena. Tell me things that if our listeners have a couple in their ward that's in a mixed orientation marriage and people are aware, what are some good things that ward members say to you, and what are some things that aren't very helpful and I'm sure you've had both types of things said.
Yeah, that's a great question. My ward is great now.
How long have you been in that ward, just for context?
We've been in the ward for 7.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've kind of seen me through all of this. I do have I have a couple of difficult examples that I'll share, just because I think it's important for members to know really what's out there and what goes on. But I have a couple of really great examples also.
That's great.
So when I first came out, it was difficult because there was a couple of ladies in the ward who went to the bishop and told the bishop that I shouldn't be allowed to teach Relief Society and I shouldn't be allowed to talk in church, and that was really painful for me, because I'm still me. I'm still the same Jena that I've always been. And so that was really painful for me to go through. And
that's really painful.
Yeah. And, I spoke in sacrament meeting a couple years ago about being gay, and my talk was very centered on how it has really helped my relationship with my Savior. And it was based around the atonement and the Savior. And after my talk, there was a few members of the ward that went in and complained and said that I'm out of line and I shouldn't say these kinds of things. And I recognized that it was really their own insecurities and their own misunderstanding of what being gay is. And that was really painful to go through also, to be misunderstood or to be labeled as somebody that I'm not. but I have a great bishop, and he and I kind of worked through that, and there was a really great experience I had after I came out. There's an older lady in my ward. She has since moved, but she came up to me the Sunday after I came out, and she was just very frank about it, and she just came up and she said, "Hey, Jena, I want to talk to you." I said, "Okay, great." And she said, in your Voices of Hope video, why did you say you were gay? I said, "Well, because I am." What else am I supposed to say? And she said, and she and I just sat there and talked, and she just wanted to know. She was curious. She wanted to know how it felt. And,
that's cool.
And she and I talked numerous times after that. And she has become a really, really close friend of mine. And it was one of the greatest examples of what members really should do. You know, just ask the gay person how they are. What does it feel like to be gay? And when they tell you, you believe what they tell you.
Talk about those last words, because that's, I think, really important, is that when they believe what they tell you. So if I'm, help our listeners understand how important that is.
Yeah. It's a really common desire, I think, for most human beings to want to be believed. We want to be validated and believed for who we are. And it makes it extra challenging within Mormonism to be believed as a gay person and a transgender, especially the transgender community. But if someone asks me questions about being gay, my hope is always that they will believe me. And I understand that it's difficult for a lot of members to believe a gay person or a transgender person. And I can understand that it causes confusion, maybe because they were raised to believe different, or they might have to change their heart and really learn how to love unconditionally rather than place their own agendas or their own ideas on the gay individual. And I recognize that it's hard to put those aside. It's hard to change your heart because it's uncomfortable. It's not easy to do. But that's really all the gay person is asking. When somebody comes out, all they're doing is saying, "Can you still love me?" That is the message behind almost every individual who comes out. This is me. Can you still love me?
That's beautiful. And yeah, we could just end the podcast right there with that, Jena. My experience is the same as you as I've talked to LGBTQ people, is a lot of people want to figure out a backstory to sort of explain why they're trans or gay and sort of not believe them and sort of say, well, if I can ask enough probing questions, I can find something in their past that explains this, that they're really not gay or they're really not trans. And so my job is to sort of figure that out and to set them straight, and how damaging that can be, and how, a straight person doesn't have to prove that they're straight. So I think we're learning, and I think you're helpful in our podcast tonight just to help people what they should just believe. If you say you're gay, you don't have to pass a litmus test. You don't have to say you're gay for a year before I'll believe you. Or if you're trans, I don't have to go through a list of criteria before, okay, now I know you're trans. We just believe people, and it's their truth. I love that word you used several times. It's their truth, and who am I to judge somebody else's truth? I just know my truth, and I honor everybody else's truth. Other things that have been helpful, or if there's listeners here like a bishop or a Relief Society president or ward member that's generally trying to do a better job, what other things that they can do that's helpful for somebody in a mixed orientation or marriage, or somebody that's just gay?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, with the leaders of the church, just treat the gay person or the mixed orientation marriage just like they're anybody else in the ward. That's been what's most helpful for me and for Todd. Our ward is great now, and I I have the luxury of going to Relief Society and feeling like I'm one of the ladies.
That's awesome.
And they all know I'm gay. A lot of them tease me about it. They think
awesome.
it's funny, they think it's great. But I think that's what most gay people and people in a mixed orientation marriage would want. They just want to be treated like they're just a normal member and that there's nothing wrong with them, because there's not. And if, a lot of people, they don't know what to say. They act like that that the gay person has some sort of condition or a disease, or they're walking around lusting after people in the ward, and they're not. I don't walk into Relief Society and say, "Oh, good, here I am in the room full of ladies. This is my lucky day." No, that's not what a gay person does.
That's awesome.
We're just at church because we want to be at church, and
just like anybody else.
Just like anybody else.
Yeah. This is a question, if your ward were here with us and we were asking your ward why your ward is better because of having you in the ward, that's kind of I bet people would say our ward is better because of Jena and Todd being in the ward and the things they've taught us. Give us any thoughts on that, on how you think your ward's actually a better ward because you're in the ward and you're openly gay.
Oh, well, thank you. That is a really good question. And I think it's a really good point. I think what happens in wards, and maybe this has happened in my ward, as we've watched a lot of the ward members change and really learn how to love us unconditionally. I think that a lot of LGBT people have that effect in the church. And I think LGBT people are a blessing to any ward, because it does cause the members to stretch themselves and to really reach outside of their own thoughts and ideas and learn how to love somebody unconditionally who is different from them.
That's a beautiful answer. And I just think as you're talking what Christ taught. And that's one of my personal beliefs right now, is that as our society improves and we eliminate all sorts of isms, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and there's more of them, that we improve as a society. And this is an area that's helping us become better as a society, as we're facing LGBTQ head on. And many members, like I did a few years ago as a YSA bishop, sort of hitting this issue head on and realizing that there's things I don't understand and trying to do better. I want to go back to your advice to couples that are considering a mixed orientation when one is gay. We haven't talked too much about this, but at some point I became aware of the Kinsey scale. That was helpful for me, the sexual orientation scale. I think it's a 1 to 5 or 1 to 6. So explain that, the Kinsey scale it is, to our listeners, and how that may play a factor on depending on where someone is on the Kinsey scale and how potentially a mixed orientation marriage would work.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the Kinsey scale is a good measuring tool as far as your sexual orientation. And I think...
And explain what it is. If our listeners have never heard of the Kinsey scale, give them Kinsey scale 101.
Kinsey scale 101. It's just a scale to figure out your level of sexual orientation, between straight and full-on gay. 7, I think it is 7 being the highest, or maybe it's 6. I honestly can't remember. It's been a long time since I've taken that test. Which brings up a really funny point, that we have this joke that if you feel like you need to take the Am I Gay test, you probably are. You don't need to take the test. If you're Googling Am I Gay, you probably are. So just be okay with it.
Just be okay with it.
Just be okay with it. But I think that's what's so great about all of us being so individual. We do have the Kinsey scale that we can use as a good testing ground. Not only for the gay spouse, but for the straight spouse. And what if someone's sexual orientation is more fluid
Mm-hmm.
in
Explain what that
a
is.
mixed orientation marriage?
Mm-hmm.
The chances in that marriage making it is obviously higher if you've got one individual who is more fluid than the other.
And explain what more fluid means. Is that to our listeners?
It just means that your sexual orientation, it's more fluid. You can either be bisexual, which means you can develop those romantic attachments and sexual orientation to either gender, which, like I said, would make the marriage a little bit easier to maneuver and manage as far as your sexual orientation. But, in any marriage, we're dealing with so many different aspects. We're dealing with sexual orientation, and some of them are even dealing with gender identity. Gender, I don't think gender is completely binary. There can be some fluidity with gender. And so there's just so many issues or so many components that go into a marriage that can make a marriage either make it or not make it. And I think when we're dealing with sexual orientation, this is why we need to look at the marriage as a whole, but the individuals within that marriage, where they are on that scale as far as their sexual orientation and where they are as far as their attachments with other parts of their life, with their emotional attachment or their spiritual attachment or any other type of attachments that they have.
I like that. I like just the non-cookie cutter answer that you're giving. And so I think a cookie cutter answer could be, well, if you're bisexual and somebody else is straight, then this mixed orientation marriage works.
Right.
And I think what you're saying is, well, don't get into these formula type situations. You've got to look at the totality of a situation. You can't look at other examples and say, well, that's what I should do. You should be very prayerful as a couple as you're considering a mixed orientation marriage and use all these as data points, but then make a really thoughtful spiritual decision that's based on, your truth and your revealed truth from Heavenly Father. And I like that because I think that's really good advice. Is I think more of our members that are LGBTQ are trying to make better decisions as they approach a potential marriage than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I think your voice is really helpful. I think our millennials can handle these discussions, those that are considering marriage in their 20s. I think these are the kind of things they can talk about in their relationships and their dating, and you're a good example of doing that. You set a good example of talking about all these potentially taboo subjects, and you're talking them in this podcast, but in church and in other venues, which I think members of the church are yearning for this kind of information to help them make thoughtful decisions as they move forward. So That's very helpful. Any more thoughts on that, Jena, on that topic you'd like to share with our listeners?
I really like what you've said with following up with. It really just depends on the individual. We have other mixed orientation marriages in our society who have come out and said, well, I've, no mixed orientation marriage can make it, and it's impossible, and blah, blah, blah. And I've been living a lie this whole time. And they throw out statistics about, a large percentage of mixed orientation marriages don't make it, which is true. But again, you need to look at the individual and what is the formula for their specific marriage, and what are you doing to make it work? And if it works, great. And if there comes a day when you can't make it work, guess what? We have a Father in heaven who understands, and he knows that you've done your very, 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 very best.
I love that answer. That answer's full of hope. I think hope is one of my favorite words in the gospel, and that answer is just full of hope. We're going to be okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to... I'm drawing a blank. There's a question I wanted to ask you. What is that question, Tom?
Come on. What was the question, Tom?
Like Tom. This is Tom is a good sport. He can handle all this stuff. In fact, I think he really thrives. He likes. That's sort of my point about his generation. You guys like to talk and be aware of all this stuff. I was going to ask you about the next life. You know, this question: are you going to be resurrected straight in the next life?
I sure hope not.
Good. That's the answer I'm hoping you're going to give. Jena, one of the things I picked up over the years, and I don't think the church talks about this as much, is this idea that, you know, the resurrection will make, you know, LGBTQ people straight in the next life. And they just kind of tell us how you feel about that and why that could potentially be very damaging to LGBTQ people.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And this is something that I have had a complete 360 on as I've sort of gone through my own personal, I call it a faith transition, not a faith crisis. But I have sort of had to rewire, kind of like you've said in past talks or posts, that you've had to sort of rewire your hard drive as far as the church and the gospel. This is one thing that I've had to rewire for myself, because I don't have a belief that in the next life that I will be made straight, because that's creating a completely different Jena Peterson. That's changing my soul from who I am into a completely different person. That doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel right. Because a lot of my sexual orientation, as I said before, it's a really big part of how I view the world and love and interact with people. I don't even know what I would look like as a straight person. How that doesn't make sense to my soul. Just like it wouldn't make sense to a straight person's soul. Well, it doesn't feel very good if I were to say to you, well, it's okay, Richard, you know, you just have to be straight through this life. But in the next life, you get to be gay, and guess what? You're going to be attracted to men. You're like,
I love the way you put that in the context of straight people.
Yeah.
I love that answer, and I agree with that answer. And I think the leaders of our church are not talking too much about the resurrection changing orientation in an official way for a period of time. Talk about why that can be potentially really the wrong advice for a young person who's trying to figure out a way to become straight.
Yeah. You know, I think for a long time the culture of the church has been to tell straight people and to advise them that it's okay, it's just your test. You're going to be fixed in the next life. That's a really shaming, damaging thing to say to somebody. It's telling you that you're a really broken individual, that God made a mistake on you, and that you're going to be fixed at some point. And you get to live with that your entire life. And you get to be single, and you get to carry this if you want to stay active in the church. Imagine the burden of a single gay person hearing that from a church leader. It's too much for them to handle, which is why our suicide rate is out the roof. Because it's too much to ask for them. And I don't believe that God wants that for his children. We're not meant to be alone. And we're not meant to feel ashamed of who we are. And I know that a lot of members of the church are thinking, well, you know, that Jena Peterson, she's fallen off of her rocker here. But because they compare being gay with a temptation or alcoholism or pornography or, you know, some of these other things, and you really can't compare the two. They're nothing alike. We're talking about the soul of somebody, an individual, who they are deep down inside. We're not talking about somebody who is going out and lusting after another individual and seeking to have sexual contact with any human being they come across. That's not what being gay is. And so I think because there has been such a misunderstanding in the past about what sexual orientation is and what being gay is, that's where this advice has been so damaging. And my hope is that we can change that, and that we can move in the direction of loving the individual, embracing them, giving them hope that there's nothing wrong with them, and that we're going to love and support them in whatever they choose and their agency, because that's one of the most beautiful parts of life is we have agency. It's one of the core doctrines of the gospel is agency, but somehow people within Mormonism get bent out of shape if someone chooses agency against their own ideas.
Mm-hmm. Jena, as people are trying to understand gay people, are there any analogies that you'd use to help people understand what it's like to be gay and coming out as gay?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like to use analogies when I'm trying to educate people and with my clients and different things that I do. I think one of the best analogies that I use is, okay, so let's say you have somebody who was born with brown eyes into a world of everybody with blue eyes. Okay, so the person with brown eyes chooses to put contacts in to appear as if he has blue eyes so that he can fit in, so that he can be treated the way that everyone else is treated, so that he can feel a part of this blue-eyed society. He doesn't have to look different. He doesn't have to feel different. He doesn't have to be marginalized or oppressed or anything. He just gets to be a part. Well, there's probably going to come a time in his life where he wants people to know that he actually doesn't have blue eyes, he has brown eyes. Because it can be difficult to hold on to that. Because he's not showing his true self. He's pretending. And so there comes a day when he takes out those contacts and he says, hey, guess what, everybody? I've got brown eyes. Can you still love me? I'm still the same person I've always been. And that eye color, it's not going to change. I've always had brown eyes, and now you get to see them. And I think it's the exact same thing when somebody comes out as gay. That's how it was for me, right? I wore these contacts for a while, and I pretended to be the straight person because I got to fit in. Mm-hmm. I got to go to church. I got to be a straight person at church. I pretended very well. Mm-hmm. I played that role. I knew what to say as a straight person. I know exactly what to do. But there came a day when that was too painful to hold on to because that wasn't me. And so I decided to take the contacts out and say, guess what, everybody? I'm actually gay. I'm the same as I've always been. And I can't change that. And I just hope that you're still going to love me. This isn't new information. It's new to you, but it's not new and it's not different. And I think that's essentially what gay people are. That's what happens when they come out. It's just really as simple as that. They're just taking out the contacts or they're taking that mask off and hoping that they can still be accepted and embraced in this society and in the church.
I love that analogy. I love the visual of that. That's beautiful. You've been really vulnerable, Why have you been willing to be so vulnerable and share so much personal information? Most people can't do what you've done. It takes real courage to do that. In fact, the word vulnerable wasn't probably even in my vocabulary 5 years ago. It's certainly a word I understand much, and people that are vulnerable, I just have incredible respect for them, for the courage to be open. Why are you willing to be so vulnerable? That takes great courage.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I will, I will say that it's not easy to be vulnerable. Um, and I always try to do my best to speak from my heart, because that's who I am. But it's hard because I know that I risk a lot of judgment, because I do sit in a really interesting situation with being active in the church, but I'm gay, but I'm married to my husband, and I support gay marriage, and I sit in a really, really difficult situation that can create a lot of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But my hope is always that my vulnerability and sharing my heart with people will just help them to be more educated, and that I can create a safer place for those people who are younger than me, and just create more education for people in the church and create a safe space for LGBT people, and not just for gay people, but for transgender people. I have some really close friends who are transgender, and I pray that there comes a time when they can feel comfortable in church also. But those are the reasons why I choose to be vulnerable, and I will do it as long as I can, until the vulnerability maybe gets the best of me. But for now, I feel like it's what I need to do, and I feel like it's a blessing and a good opportunity for me to be able to share my journey and my thoughts and my experiences, and also my testimony about the gospel, but also about LGBT people and the importance of both, and how we can keep building a bridge between the church and LGBT people. So
Thank you. I love your answer on vulnerability, and I think it helps other people. You're an example and a role model for other people, straight and LGBTQ, to be vulnerable. I think our church is doing more of that, and we're more honest and open in church about who we are and how we feel. And I think then that allows us to be able to bear one another's burdens and comfort each other and mourn when we really know the individual crosses we all are bearing. So I think you being vulnerable gives us all courage to be vulnerable. And I think that then helps us be better people. So thank you, Jena.
you're welcome. Thank you.
I'm interested. It's just interesting that we've come to where we are from two different points of view, and we're basically believe the same, And I think the thing that's common in our journey is I was willing to sort of wipe my hard drive clean because I realized straight people have been sort of programming me to how I should feel about LGBTQ people, and I wiped that hard drive clean, and then I sort of felt like in Nephi where it says the mysteries of God are given to him that diligently seeketh, and I read that scripture one day and I thought, well, one of the mysteries of God is his LGBTQ children and how they fit into the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you get answers to that by diligently seeketh. And I thought, well, you're doing a good job diligently seeking by listening to LGBT people tell their story. And that's one of the purposes of these podcasts, and the power of your story is you help people understand. I love what you talk about with younger people, that their orientation is not a mistake. And I look at the things of the world like pornography and alcohol and addiction as things of the world. And that's very different than, just like you said, a soul of an LGBTQ person. That's a beautiful gift from God. And that sexual orientation should be celebrated, embraced, and supported, and shouldn't ever be compared with something of the world. So as you spoke, I thought, well, you're just speaking like I'd speak. And here we come to this from very different roads, but I think it's part of, I think it's how Heavenly Father feels. And you've learned that through your own life experience, and I think more of our members are learning that by listening and learning and then loving. So that's very helpful. If there's younger people that are, if there's somebody closeted in the late teens, 20s listening to this podcast that's really in a deep, dark, difficult spot, and they were sitting here and you just want to give them a little bit of hope and a little bit of encouragement, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, there is hope, and there are a lot of people out there who love you unconditionally and who will embrace you for who you are. And there are people changing and stepping up to the plate every single day. I see miracles every day in the church and with people that I work with, and hearts are changing that I never thought would change. And we have support groups. We have so much out there to help the young people. And if they can just find that support, and hopefully through this podcast and your website, there is hope out there, and there's a lot of people who love unconditionally, and we can always have hope that people can change and really learn how to embrace and love LGBT people. Like I said, because I see it happening every day. I've seen it in my own ward. There's people in my ward that I never thought would change, and they love me, and they have embraced me, and it's been really, really heartwarming. And I know that their love is not conditional. I know that if Todd and I were to divorce, because it got to be too painful, I know that we would have the unconditional love and support from a lot of people, because we've been open and honest about where we're at. And I hope that brings hope to the younger generation, and give them courage to come out and to really find a good support system, because there's a lot of people out there who can love and support.
Thank you, Jena, from all of our listeners, for sharing your story on today's podcast. You are awesome. You are wonderful. You are a light to me. You're a light to our listeners. You're a light to so many. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for sharing your story and having the courage to come out and talk about your mixed orientation marriage. Thank you for keeping faith. It's hard for LGBTQ people to keep their faith. As our church is working to figure this out. I call it the limitations of our institutional church. Mm-hmm. And there's work to do there. I believe we can be the restored church. That doesn't mean we're the perfect church, and it doesn't mean we have everything figured out. And there's more work to do, and I think most members realize there's got to be more work here. But you're teaching us how to love and support and accept. And so thank you for who you are and sharing more of your story with us tonight. On behalf of all our listeners, we thank you, Jena, and thank you, signing off.